Could Yemen fall apart as a country? Separatists in the south seize the city of Aden and rally for independence. How does this affect the fragile Saudi-UAE coalition fighting the Houthis for more than 4 years? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Yemen has not always been one country. North and South Yemen came together in 1990 after years of conflict. But it's been an uneasy union and the civil war is deepening the divide. Separatists from the Southern Transitional Council, the STC, are part of the Saudi-UAE coalition fighting the Houthis. But in a dramatic twist last week, they took over the city of Aden, the seat of the Saudi-backed Yemeni government. Thousands of people waved the old South Yemen flag during a rally to support the STC. The government is urging the fighters to pull out. As we can see, the war in Yemen is not a single conflict, but a multifaceted power struggle. Houthi fighters, backed by Iran, control much of the north, including the capital Sana'a. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates launched a campaign against the Houthis to restore the internationally recognized government of Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. But the UAE is also backing armed groups who want southern Yemen separated from the rest of the country. The Southern Transitional Council says it has a mandate to push Hadi's forces out. Also in the south, there are Alkhader-linked armed groups and the Yemeni branch of ISIL. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from New York, Alkhader, Sulaiman, Director of Office of Foreign Affairs of the Southern Transitional Council in New York. In Geneva is Elisabeth Kendall, Senior Research Fellow at the Pembroke College of the University of Oxford, who recently visited southern Yemen. From Gothenburg, Sweden, Afra Nasser, journalist and editor-in-chief of the Sana'a Review. Thank you all for joining us. Mr. Alkhader, the government of the internationally recognized government of President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi says that what the STC forces did in Aden was a military coup.
Well, first I would like to thank you for having me, and like to thank your guests and all those who are watching. Of course, the internationally recognized government is going to say that this is a coup, where it's unfortunate that this recognized government is not providing any basic services, or at least minimizing chaos or corruption. It's unfortunate that it's only talking about the recent activities, whereas for 4 years after the liberation of these southern governorates, there is still instability. There's plenty of chaos. There is terrorist attacks. The internationally recognized government is also hijacked by radical groups, or who have at least strong ties with radical groups. Mm-hmm. They are just because they are internationally recognized, they also have a duty to the people, a duty to the civilians whom are experiencing harsh lifestyles while they're enjoying a lavish lifestyle outside the country in Riyadh and elsewhere, trying to actually run this country from abroad through social media platforms and Wi-Fi.
I see your point. Elisabeth, you've heard what Alkhader said, basically, that the reason why their fighters interfered is because the government has failed the Yemenis, particularly in the south.
Yes, that's right. And there's a lot of truth in what's just been said. The south has very legitimate grievances going back decades. The country hasn't been run well. The south has suffered. It's very understandable that they should wish to take matters into their own hands. However, what wasn't mentioned was that their end goal is an independent state. It is not just that the Southern Transition Council wants to clear out terrorist and corrupt elements from the Hadi government, as it has so far framed it. Ultimately, their leaders do want an independent state. So it's quite clear that the government of Yemen can't countenance that, because that would be the end of Yemen as a united country.
Afra, how do you see what happened in Aden? Is there any general sentiment among people in Yemen, particularly in the north, that this was the beginning of the disintegration of the country?
In the north, the reaction are two different ones from the people on the ground. Many of my family members in the north, they call me actually and ask me what's going on in the south. There's absolutely media blackout, so a lot of people in the north don't know what's happening in south of Yemen. But the northern leadership run by Houthi, I think they are in a very they're concerned by what's going on. There is no strong stance from them, but I think a lot of not only Houthis, but a lot of the politicians see that what's going on in Aden way of trying to emphasize the southern seat in whatever peace talks going to happen. So don't forget that during all the peace talks that you actually, Hashem, has covered in Sweden, there was a lot of marginalization going on to southern voices. So I think that what's going on in Aden is one desperate way trying to say that we a share in whatever political settlement going to happen for the general Yemen.
Alkhader, we just want to get some sense of clarity here. There's been today, still ongoing, a pro-independence rally in Aden. From your own perspective as STC, are you moving towards declaring the independence of the South?
Yes, the ultimate goal is to address all the grievances and the aspirations of the Southern people. This is the entire basis that the STC has its legitimacy on the ground, at least. The Southern people today have gathered from all governorates, directorates to all state one thing, that they want to remove any government that stands in their way and their achievements and goals, and they're acting on a nothing to lose basis. Now, as mentioned earlier, the basic services are not even being provided. Institutions are not active at all.
You've mentioned that earlier. Do you have any timeline for the proclamation of independence? Do you have a plan where you would say by next November or December we will declare an independent southern state?
No, we don't have a timeline. The Southern Transitional Council holds the regional security as high importance as well. So we consider ourselves as strong, active, and main partners in this coalition that is fighting off the Iranian-backed Houthis on all fronts. So we prioritize the regional securities as well as our the aspirations of the Southern people.
Since you've been mentioning the regional implications, and this is going to be my question to Elisabeth, this is something which is really extraordinary happening now in Yemen. I would like you to further explain this to us. You have a coalition which is led by Saudi Arabia. The UAE is part of that coalition. The Saudis are saying they are in favor of a united Yemen. The UAE seems to be in favor of the STC, which wants to break away from the north. We're talking about diametrically opposed agendas here.
We are. I think what keeps them both together is the overarching struggle against Iran, which is perceived to be backing the Houthis and indeed is vocally backing the Houthis. And so that has enabled them to plaster over the cracks in their coalition with regard to their end goals. But you make an important point. These recent clashes wouldn't have happened had not the United Arab Emirates funded and helped to form the Southern Transitional Council, and alongside that recruited thousands of soldiers across the south who are now able to back up its agenda. So although the leaderships of both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates will be able publicly to patch over the cracks, it's very unlikely that that will translate into their respective forces on the ground, the Houthi forces versus the STC forces, being able to mend their rifts. And indeed, we're seeing both of those forces now harden their attitudes today.
Athra, you must have seen what's happening in social media over the last few days. Basically, this is creating a divide among the Yemenis. Some would tell you these are legitimate grievances of the people in the south. You have others who are saying that the STC in particular is being used as a proxy by the Emiratis to further implement their own agenda in Yemen.
I'll reply to that, but first I want to add something to what Elisabeth just spoke about.
Go ahead.
One of the maybe the main threat to Yemen's unity is not the STC, it's not the Southern Movement, it's not UAE. It's actually the incompetence of the internationally recognized Yemeni government. We have to understand that this government has failed on so many levels in trying to address the conflict or the fighting with the Houthis, or even trying to embrace what's going on in the south right after the liberation of Aden. So I think it's very, very important to address the weakness and the ill management from the Yemeni government. And that's something that the international community has to pay attention to, because they keep supporting this government with no end game for the government trying to get the country together. But speaking about the basically the human rights violations and the polarization going on between the inside the South, I think it's very alarming that in the name of separation, there are a huge or a crisis of human rights violation going on inside the South. So as we speak, there are many reports of arrest and detention of opposition to STC. Anyone who's trying to mobilize or speak against the Southern Transitional Council is met with violence and repression, and that's a kind of like a copy paste of the what the President Ali Abdullah Saleh used to do in the name of unity. He used to meet the Southern movement with brutal repression. So we seem to have see a continuation of that culture of violence and repression
in the south,
which is absolutely unfortunate.
Alkhader, you spoke of the pro-independence sentiment in the south as a one voice, when you know that everyone knows that you are also divided within yourselves. You have the STC on one hand, you have the Hadramis who don't want to be part of this whole thing. They would like to have their own independent state. People of Aden remain still loyal to President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. The Dali'is are of a different agenda. It's a disintegrated South within itself.
So that's actually not very accurate, Hashem. Unfortunately, that is what all who stand against an independent South would say, that we are factions and we are fractured. But the goal for all these, so to speak, factions are the independent state. They only differed on the path on to get the independent state. As far as the
you are very young,
and
you seem to forget that in 1986, thousands of people were killed in the south because of divisions between people of Aden and people of Dala.
Yes, there have been differences in the past. That does not make us in any way subhuman. We still have our aspirations. We have our human right of self-determination. Of course, all these matters can be resolved through referendums. And as you have seen today, many have announced, leaders of other factions have announced their support to what the Southern Transitional Council has spearheaded as of now for taking away at least radical groups that worked under the internationally recognized umbrella. I also want to add a comment regarding the UAE involvement. The UAE is not was not only involved in South Yemen. UAE involvement was in many anti-Houthi fronts. So no, they do not have the Southern Transitional Council as a proxy in the area, and no, the Southern Transitional Council they have no promises from UAE for an independent state. The Southern Transitional Council only speaks for the people, chosen by the people to protect the people. And the recent events, even the UAE has called for de-escalation of the Aden
It has
issues
called for
recently.
de-escalation, but you know at the same time they are the ones who are backing, financing and arming the security belt, which is a group of militia organizations operating in different parts of the south. Elisabeth, I would like to ask you this question about the secessionist movement or the pro-independence movement in the south. They have joined the unity in 1990, hoping that it would bring about prosperity and justice. But then they say after 1990, what happened was marginalization of the people of the South. They were undermined. The voices were battered by the political establishment and by the elite, predominantly from the north of the country. And now they say it's about our right to break away because we don't think this is a good thing. My question to you is, do you think the international community is willing to give them independence if they choose tomorrow to vote for independence?
I think the international community does sympathise with the kinds of problems that you've outlined that have genuinely occurred in the South. They have very legitimate grievances. However, I do not believe that the international community will favour a split Yemen, simply because of the problems that you outlined earlier, which are that the South is not united amongst itself. Yes, the STC does have the loudest voice and it's predominantly supported in Aden and its surroundings, but that does not hold true for the rest of the South. Yes, many people came to very large demonstration to show their solidarity with the STC yesterday, but there are millions of people inside the South and they didn't all show up. And I think it's important to ask, when the STC spokesperson has just dissociated the UAE from the STC, it's important to ask who is funding the STC, because that will tell you a lot, and the answer is the UAE. I'd also like to mention that there are groups in the east of Yemen, in Al-Mahra specifically, also in Hadramaut, who have their own secessionist ambitions. They may not be realistic, but they are there nonetheless, and they do not wish to be part of a separate South.
Afra, have we reached the point where you can see the future of Yemen as being divided into 2, 3, 4? No one knows.
I think history knows. If you look back to history, Yemen was not united in the sense that we know today. But let me tell you that I think, as a Yemeni personally, I think that all Yemenis have to think of what type of Yemen they want to see in the future. It's a transitioning point for the South, the North, the East, to think of what type of governance and political system that they want to have. Maybe it's divided, maybe it's united Yemen, but Yemenis have to decide for themselves. And unfortunately, with foreign intervention, such as what the UAE is doing, is absolutely going to make that trajectory flawed. And the South especially should know that more than anyone else, that having colonized colony in the South would absolutely have devastating impact for their future. So, but all Yemenis have to decide together what type of future for Yemen they want.
Alkhader, you've said that you are, as STC, independent of any foreign influence, and that the Emiratis are not there to manipulate your agenda. But let me ask you this. You said that one of the biggest problems, one of the main reasons why you are interfering militarily in the South is against the Islah, which is a predominantly Muslim Brotherhood affiliated political party. And Islah happens to be an existential threat, or the Muslim Brotherhood, an existential threat for the Emiratis. Isn't this a clear indication that you are carrying water here for the Emiratis? You're doing nothing but answering the terms of the Emiratis.
No, that is incorrect. That is incorrect. And the UAE is only a part of a Saudi-led coalition that was all called upon by the legitimate government. And to hear the calls regarding to what Elisabeth mentioned, the calls of the southern people who are in hundreds of thousands, to belittle those calls, saying that not all of the South Yemeni people, which does not make much sense, that in any rally that the entire population would attend in a rally, that does not ever happen, nor will it ever happen in any circumstances. But the calls of the Southern people are to reinstate their pre-90 state, based on the events that happened after the failed unity project that turned into an all-out occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the fact that there are factions in South Yemen, nobody is saying that they do not exist. We're just simply saying that the goals of all factions is an independent state. They
Mm-hmm.
only differed on the path to reach that independent state. As far as the Southern Transitional Council, it has been trying to fill in the void for the internationally recognized government, as far as even basic services or even security. The security belt
mm-hmm.
is actually under the international recognized government, and they have done a decent job while the internationally recognized government have been hijacked by the Muslim Brotherhood.
At a massive cost, because you remember international human rights organizations have been talking about the massive clampdown, the torture, the killing of many innocent civilians in the south of the country, and they've been blaming the security belt. Elisabeth, I would like to move beyond the domestic politics in Yemen and move towards the regional implication. Some say that the reason why the UAE is pretty much willing to control the south is because they're looking at the Gulf of Aden and Bab el-Mandeb as an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz if it gets blocked one day.
Yes, that's a possibility. I do not have a direct line into the UAE, so I obviously cannot speak for them, but it certainly follows a pattern of activity across the region. Aden could be an important port. It's Yemen's most important port. And we also know that the UAE has taken control of ports in Shabwa and in Hadramaut, and also at one point in Socotra and across other areas of the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Eritrea. So it does make sense that it's part of a broader, potentially trade and commercially motivated exercise, and not just about fighting the Houthis up in the north. Mm-hmm. I should also say that it does play into a security agenda for the STC, mm-hmm. For the UAE, helped by the STC, because it is in the south that Alkhader and indeed Islamic State in Yemen have been most active. And so that does make sense.
After, I remember in 2011-12, the calls for unity in Yemen, the national dialogue, all that seems to be over now with the latest developments. Do you see in the future the possibility for the key players, the secessionists in the south, Al-Islah in the central part of the country, the Houthis in the north, to come together, set aside their differences and talk about the future of Yemen, or is it more of a wishful thinking now?
You're right. In 2011, and especially with the National Dialogue Conference, there was a sort of a realignment of the political national debates, and actually a lot of Southerners saw that the new constitution and the federal system would solve the Southern question. But I think Yemenis need a leader, sort of Nelson Mandela, that could come with, advocating for peace and unity and trying to reconcile all these grievances and trying to put the pieces together somehow. It's absolutely wishful thinking. We need a miracle, I think. Otherwise, the fragmentation will continue, and no, I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe 3 Yemens, not only 2 Yemens. Even the East would want to succeed.
Afra Nasser, Elisabeth, Kendall, Alkhader, Sulaiman, thank you very much indeed, and I really appreciate your time with us here on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here in Doha. Bye for now.